I had nothing to do with it. Then why the secrecy? We need the truth. This is the truth.
Thika Ake, Amy Puro Galpa Dabala Hansa Bada D, Ekatana, Kleina, Ekaber Kapi Kara Yaya Amana Farama 8 Sajie Diki. The prison was silent at night. Not the peaceful kind of silence, but the kind that feels heavy, suffocating, and alive. Inside one of the most secure high-risk facilities, a man sat alone in a dimly lit interrogation room. His hands rested calmly on the table. His posture was relaxed. His breathing slow. Too calm. The kind of calm that doesn't belong to an innocent person. Outside, rain tapped against the barred windows. The faint hum of fluorescent lights filled the room. A camera blinked quietly in the corner, recording every micro-movement, every flicker of emotion. The man lifted his eyes. Cold, detached, observant. This was not just a criminal. This was a mind built for manipulation. A predator who did not hunt with force, but with intelligence. A strategist who treated people like chess pieces. A criminal who believed fear was more powerful than violence. His story did not begin with murder. It began with control. As a child, he was described as quiet, but not shy. Teachers noticed he rarely expressed emotion. Classmates said he could convince others to do things without raising his voice. Small incidents happened early. A classmate blamed for something he had done. A missing wallet no one could trace back to him. Lies told so smoothly they sounded like truth. Most people saw harmless mischief. But beneath the surface, something darker was growing. He learned how people react under pressure. How guilt sounds. How fear looks. How uncertainty feels. While other children played, he observed. By his teenage years, manipulation became his favorite skill. He tested people, pushed emotional boundaries, experimented with influence. He discovered that people could be controlled without threats, only with timing, tone, and psychological pressure. And then he discovered power. The first serious crime came quietly. A break-in. No forced entry. No fingerprints. No witnesses. He planned it like a science experiment. He studied camera angles, footstep patterns, shift schedules, lighting behavior. When he executed the plan, it looked effortless. Investigators found nothing. No trail. No pattern. No suspect. From that moment on, he stopped seeing himself as ordinary. He saw himself as superior. Each crime became more complex. He escalated from theft to psychological manipulation. From manipulation to organized deception. From deception to psychological terror. He began studying victims, their routines, their fears, their habits, their emotional weaknesses. He didn't rush. He waited, sometimes for weeks, sometimes for months. To him, patience was a weapon. Fear was entertainment. Control was reward. He rarely used physical violence. He didn't need to. He could ruin lives with information. Destroy trust with whispers. Break confidence with subtle pressure. Victims often didn't even realize they had been targeted. People thought they made mistakes. They didn't know they had been guided. Law enforcement noticed patterns eventually. Minor incidents connected like puzzle pieces. Break-ins, disappearances, fraud cases, psychological intimidation reports. Nothing obvious, nothing straightforward, but detectives began to sense something unnatural. A single mind, a single signature, a single intelligence orchestrating chaos. Criminal psychologists were brought in. They described a profile: highly intelligent, emotionally detached, obsessed with dominance, comfortable with deception, thrives on control, a personality built for psychological warfare. Meanwhile, the criminal continued living an ordinary life. He attended social events, held conversations, smiled at strangers. No one suspected the darkness behind his calm expression. Until the first mistake happened. During one operation, he left behind a small scrap of paper. Just numbers, meaningless at first glance, but detectives kept it. Later, they realized the numbers were not random. They matched patterns, timelines, location codes. It was the first real crack in his armor. Surveillance intensified. Undercover officers tracked behavioral anomalies. Patterns emerged. The criminal was no longer invisible. He didn't notice. Arrogance had begun to grow. He believed he was untouchable. That belief would become his downfall. The operation to capture him required patience. Weeks of monitoring, months of psychological profiling, dozens of coordinated departments. Finally, he was brought in. Not violently, not dramatically, calmly, just like he always behaved. He entered the interrogation room with confidence. He sat down. He smiled. He expected to win. The interrogation began slowly. No accusations. No pressure. Just conversation. Detectives studied him. His eye movement. His breathing. His posture. His micro-expressions. He answered smoothly. Too smoothly. Lies wrapped in intelligence. Truth hidden behind charm. But psychologists noticed subtle signals. A hesitation here. A contradiction there. A micro-expression lasting less than a second. Cracks. Small, but meaningful. As questioning continued, tension built. He tried to steer the narrative. Control the pacing. Redirect suspicion. But investigators were prepared. They asked questions designed not to trap him logically, but psychologically. Questions that disrupted his sense of control. Silences stretched. The ticking clock grew louder. The room felt smaller. For the first time, his confidence weakened. A flicker of irritation, a tightening jaw, a moment of impatience. He hated losing control, and the detectives knew it. Hours passed. His voice remained calm, but his body betrayed him. Micro-tremors, dry lips, longer pauses. Finally, the first confession began. Not emotional, not remorseful, analytical. He spoke about his actions the way a scientist speaks about experiments. He described manipulation, psychological dominance, strategic fear creation. He didn't regret the harm. He admired the efficiency. More confessions followed, more victims, more schemes, more psychological games, each revelation darker than the last. The criminal mind was exposed. A mind that thrived on fear. A mind that treated people as objects. A mind built for control. By the end, investigators understood one terrifying truth. This man did not commit crimes out of rage. He committed them out of fascination. Fascination with power, with influence, with fear, and this was only the beginning of his story. The more he spoke, the clearer it became. This was not a man driven by anger. This was a man driven by control. He described how he selected his victims. Not randomly, not emotionally, methodically. He chose people who were predictable. People with routines. People with weaknesses. He watched them like a hunter watches prey. Their morning habits. Their evening walks. Their tone of voice. Their emotional stability. He memorized patterns. When they left home. When they felt lonely. When they felt vulnerable. He didn't rush toward action. He waited. Sometimes for months. To him, the anticipation was more thrilling than the act itself. He described one case where he never physically harmed the victim, yet completely destroyed their life. He planted doubt, spread rumors, manipulated relationships, turned friends into enemies. The victim lost their job, lost their social standing, lost their sense of reality. And he observed it all, like a scientist monitoring an experiment. He admitted something terrifying. He wanted to see how much fear a human mind could endure before it shattered. Not out of hatred, out of curiosity. As years passed, his crimes escalated. Not in violence, but in complexity. He built small psychological networks. People who unknowingly helped him gather information. Someone tracking schedules. Someone sharing rumors. Someone delivering messages. None of them knew the full picture. He never trusted brute force. He trusted influence. He described himself as a puppeteer. People were strings. Fear was leverage. Information was control. Then came the prison chapter. After his arrest, most criminals would feel powerless. But prison did not weaken him. It became a new battlefield. A new laboratory. A new place to study human fear. Inside prison, violence is common. But he didn't rely on violence. He relied on mind games. He learned inmate routines, guard behavior, power hierarchies. He identified the weak, the impulsive, the ambitious. He whispered doubts, planted rivalries, manipulated conflicts. Fights broke out without anyone realizing he had triggered them. He could cause chaos without ever lifting a finger. Some inmates feared him more than physically violent prisoners. Because he could destroy reputations, turn allies into enemies, make people feel unsafe without touching them. He enjoyed psychological dominance. Fear in others gave him a sense of superiority. Investigators reviewed prison recordings. His tone was calm, his posture relaxed, his eyes observant. He never panicked. Even behind bars, he felt in control. During further interrogation, he revealed one of his darkest traits. He never saw people as humans, only as systems, inputs, outputs, reactions. He analyzed emotions the way an engineer analyzes machines. He explained that love, fear, trust, guilt were simply tools. Not feelings, tools. When asked whether he ever felt remorse, he answered coldly, "Remorse is inefficiency." That sentence became one of the most chilling moments in the case. Psychologists reviewing his statements concluded that his mind operated with almost no emotional empathy. Instead, he possessed extreme cognitive empathy, the ability to understand emotions without feeling them. A dangerous combination, because he could predict pain without caring about it. As investigators pressed further, he confessed to crimes that had never been connected before. Cases from different cities, different years, different methods, all linked by a single psychological signature. Control, timing, fear, manipulation. He had been operating for far longer than anyone suspected. And his influence had reached further than law enforcement ever imagined. But then came the moment that shattered his confidence. A detective revealed something he never expected. A pattern, not in his crimes, but in his personality. They showed him that his greatest strength, his intelligence, had also created predictability. That his need for control had created a routine. That his arrogance had left fingerprints on his behavior. For the first time, his calm expression faltered. A subtle change in breathing. A micro-expression of tension. A momentary loss of composure. He realized he was no longer the hunter. He was the subject of analysis. The experiment had turned against the experimenter. Inside prison, most men survive through strength. He survived through intelligence. While others relied on physical power, he relied on perception. He watched everything. Who feared whom? Who owed favors? Who wanted power? Who was desperate? He mapped the emotional hierarchy of the prison. Not by force, but by observation. He learned that in prison, fear spreads faster than violence. A rumor could cause a riot. A suggestion could start a war. A whisper could destroy alliances. He began testing inmates. A subtle comment here, a planted idea there. Soon, conflicts erupted, and no one traced them back to him. Two rivals fought violently, never realizing they had been guided toward each other. A gang leader lost control, his authority weakened by doubts planted in his mind. An inmate isolated himself, driven by paranoia he didn't understand. And he watched it all unfold. He once admitted, "Violence is noisy. Fear is silent, and silence is more powerful." Even guards noticed something strange. Wherever he interacted, tension followed. People avoided him, not because he threatened them, but because he understood them. He could expose insecurities, reveal weaknesses, trigger emotional collapse. He had turned prison into another psychological laboratory. Then investigators discovered something more disturbing. He wasn't only manipulating inmates. He was studying interrogation techniques. He memorized questioning styles, noted emotional triggers, tracked how detectives reacted under stress. He wanted to understand how authority thinks. Not to escape, but to control perception. During another interrogation session, he began reversing the dynamic. He asked detectives questions, not aggressively, not emotionally, curiously. How long have you done this job? What makes you believe people? Do you think criminals are born, or created? The detectives realized he wasn't just responding. He was analyzing them, trying to understand their psychology, trying to predict their reactions, trying to maintain control even while under custody. Psychologists later described it as predatory intelligence. A mind that never stops calculating. A mind that never stops observing. A mind that refuses to surrender power. Then came his darkest confession. He admitted that some of his psychological experiments continued even after imprisonment. He manipulated rivalries to observe escalation. He tested how much fear it took to break someone emotionally. He created paranoia by planting information that might or might not be true. Some inmates lost sleep. Some suffered panic attacks. Some became violent because of pressure he engineered. He did not see suffering. He saw data. When asked why, he replied, "I wanted to understand how the human mind collapses." That sentence became one of the most disturbing statements in the entire investigation. As investigators reconstructed his past, they discovered a pattern. He never wanted chaos. He wanted control over chaos. He wanted to know how far he could bend reality before it snapped. But eventually, his obsession betrayed him. He left psychological fingerprints, not physical ones, behavioral ones. The need to dominate, the need to observe reactions, the need to control narratives. These patterns allowed investigators to predict him, to trap him psychologically, to push him into revealing what he never planned to reveal. And as the case unfolded, it became clear, this was not just a criminal case. This was a study of one of the darkest minds law enforcement had ever encountered. But the most terrifying revelation was still ahead. Because his final confession would expose not only his crimes, but the true depth of his psychological darkness.